scary stories. This is definitely going to be hard to believe, and I know, but I feel this is good for me. It's time I tell this story, so please hear me out. I just apologize for this being so short. Currently, it's 1:05 in the morning, and honestly, I don't think I can write this any time but now. It needs to be established, so here we go. Back in 2017, my cousin Austin killed his ex-girlfriend, and then himself. I hung out with him the night he did it, according to the police, at about 7:30 a.m. He got in an argument with the girlfriend's mother over the girlfriend leaving him. He got angry and pulled a pistol and shot her in the abdomen. When the girlfriend came rushing into the room, he shot her too, right in the chest. Then he went into another room and shot her sister. Allegedly, he just left them to bleed out. He just walked out of the house and drove away, going straight to mine, although he didn't show up to mine until about 1:30 that day. But I swear he acted normal, nothing unusual, at least to me. All couples fight, so when this happened, I figured he was just in a bad situation. He told me he was having some relationship issues, and he needed somewhere to stay. So I just ordered a pizza and we watched a Netflix documentary. Somehow I ended up falling asleep and woke up a few hours later. By the time I woke up, news of the murders actually broke. Austin's picture was on the TV screen, and he was long gone. Immediately I called the police and informed them the boyfriend of the victim stayed at my house, and before I knew it, a state trooper was outside my door. Without hesitation, I let him in, and we discussed everything. Whether it was the color of his shirt, or if he had sweat from his brow. But that's when he got the transmission over the radio, "Suspect's been found." They found him on a dirt road about 3 miles from the murder house, dead in his car. He shot himself in the head. He still had the gun with him. He could have killed me. I could have been one of his victims. It's been years, but I still get nightmares. No one in this family really talks about it anymore. We have put it all behind us, but the fact I was around him after he did such heinous things is just unbelievable. I slept in the same house as a killer and didn't even know it. And that's what scares me the most. So this was really before catfishing became a term we used, though the act itself has always been around as long as social media has. This was during my freshman year of college, and it was during the MySpace era. In college, I made friends with someone in my honors curriculum class, Leslie. She in turn introduced me many of her other friends, who then became my friends. They had all known each other for years, but were very welcoming to me, and I felt very much like a part of the group. That being said, I didn't really know them that well when this happened. What they did seemed, well, not like them. But then I realized I didn't exactly know what was like them. A member of the group, Catherine, is going away to school in Boston, and so the night before, we all decided to have a going away party of sorts. We were going to visit another friend, Tamara, who was going to school in Philadelphia, and then we were going to just have fun in the city. Our designated meeting space to drive down there was Dunkin' Donuts. When I got there, Leslie was there with our friends Samantha and Anthony, and Leslie looked pissed. She was sitting there with her arms crossed, kind of staring at nothing, but with an angry look on her face. As for Samantha and Anthony, they kept looking at the door, and they seemed both nervous and shifty. I could tell they were on edge. I sat down at the table of awkwardness, since we had to wait on Catherine and a couple of more friends, and things got awkward when no one was talking. Finally, I was just like, "What is the deal with you there?" Leslie replied. "You should ask them," gesturing to Anthony and Samantha. They suddenly looked guilty, but before they could answer, the door opened again, and they both went from looking guilty to anxious and mildly scared. I looked to the door and saw just a normal guy. When he walked in, he just kind of glanced around the room like he was looking for someone. Anthony and Samantha wouldn't say anything. Leslie just kept huffing and shaking her head. And all three kept looking over at this guy as he sat down. As soon as Catherine and the others got there, it was like we couldn't get out of there fast enough. Catherine, our friends Evan and Julie, and I were very confused. It was on the way to Philadelphia that we learned the truth. It was Leslie who told us. Apparently, Anthony and Samantha had created a fake MySpace account, and they had been catfishing this guy, Calvin. We didn't know the term catfishing yet, but that's what it was. They had created a fake account using a picture of an actress or singer or something. I can't remember. Only her face was obscured. Apparently this had been going on for a couple of weeks, and the conversations had gotten serious. Like Calvin seemed to really like this fake girl they had created. I didn't know why they did this, and when I asked them, they didn't really have a reason. Mostly, they were just bored. It turned out they had told him to meet at that Dunkin' Donuts at the time we were there. I think that once he showed up, Anthony and Samantha realized that this wasn't just a game, that Calvin was a real person with real feelings, and I do think they felt badly about what they had done. But it was too late. They couldn't take it back. There was no reason they had chosen Calvin. He was just some random guy they had picked. I guess Leslie had found out about it a couple of days prior and told them to end it. And that was why she was so angry at them. Because they had told her what had happened. That Calvin was supposed to be there. After that, I never really saw Anthony and Samantha in the same way. They weren't really people I wanted to be friends with, especially when I saw the messages and saw how much they had gotten Calvin to like him. I thought this could be the end of it. I was wrong. About a week later, everyone came to my house for pizza, and Samantha and Anthony told us that they had gotten messages from Calvin. I didn't think much of it because I already knew he had been messaging their fake account, wanting to know why she had stood him up. And he seemed upset, especially when this fake girl stopped replying. But no, that wasn't what Samantha and Anthony meant. He hadn't messaged the fake account. He had messaged their accounts. I remember them telling me that my sharp intake of breath, the way my heart rate increased, that unnerved me. The messages were more than the same. But also Calvin had made it clear he knew what they had done, and he seemed even angrier. Anthony in particular got a very long, furious message from Calvin. I don't want to say I thought they deserved it, but honestly, they had done a shitty thing, and there were some consequences. I figured it would die down in a couple of days. It didn't. A few days after Calvin had messaged Anthony and Samantha, he started messaging the rest of us who had been in Dunkin' Donuts that night. Now this really scared me. Keep in mind, I was already dealing with my other stalker situation. So I was understandably on edge, and this guy had found me. I did not know much about computers, but I thought he must have traced Anthony and Samantha's IP address or something, since they'd used their own computers for the account. But when it came to the rest of us, we did not understand. How had he found us? My theory is that once he found Anthony and Samantha, he looked through their friends and recognized us from our pictures. But I don't know for sure. All of his messages came from MySpace, so at least he was texting us and stuff. But still, his messages were very angry. He kept saying things like, "How could you do this to me?" and "You made a fool of me. How dare you?" I thought about replying, but Evan had done that already, telling Calvin that we weren't responsible, and he didn't believe him. Honestly, Evan totally sold Anthony and Samantha out, but we figured that Calvin already knew they were the ringleaders. He just didn't know they were the sole perpetrators, instead thinking we all had a hand in it. I figured there was no point to defend myself since Calvin didn't believe Evan when he had tried. This went on for a couple of weeks, and it seemed like Calvin was getting increasingly angry the more we ignored him. Finally, I had had enough, and I was just like, "For God's sake." I replied and told him again that we weren't responsible, collaborating Evan's story. When I finally defended myself, Calvin messaged me back and said, "You made me into a fool, an idiot, and one day you'll know how that feels." I think you will. Maybe it was because of everything else that had happened with this guy, but that sounded like a threat, like he was going to personally make sure I knew how we had made him feel. We were lucky. As far as I know, Calvin never did anything beyond messaging us aggressively. It could have been a lot worse. Eventually, Calvin stopped messaging us, and then he deleted his account. I felt bad for the guy, and Samantha and Anthony had been wrong. But what Calvin was doing to us was wrong too, the harassment. Eventually he stopped though, after a couple of months, and I never saw him again. I slowly drifted apart from the group. First Anthony and Samantha, for obvious reasons, then Catherine, then Julie, Evan, and Leslie. I wasn't too broken up about the first two, because they weren't the kind of people I really wanted to be friends with. Not only had they done a shitty thing, they had brought Calvin into our lives, like opening a door and inviting someone in. I was hanging out with my friends, just a typical Saturday night, and around 12:30 a.m. I went back to my friend's house just to smoke some weed. So after a bit, I decided to walk home from his house. It's only a few minutes walking distance away, so around 1:30 a.m. I start trekking in the cold and dark night to go home. But I wasn't too worried because the city I live in is pretty safe. When I'm about halfway home, a taxi van slows down and drives by me, going the same way I was. It makes a U-turn in front of me, drives by me again, honks, drives past me, makes another U-turn behind me, and this time they come up to a complete stop. I didn't get to see the driver, but the passenger was between a 25 to 30-year-old male, and proceeds to shout, "Hey, sexy, you look hot. Want to come to a party?" Aside from the fact that this was creepy, I found it strange, for I was literally wearing my dad's sweater, my dad's jacket, plain black leggings, and big winter boots. I instantly freeze and think for a second maybe he thinks I'm a prostitute. But prostitution isn't common at all where I live, or it's not a big city, and it's a very cold night during this time of year. After about 20 seconds of us just looking at each other, and me frozen in fear, I can't think of what to do, but just kept walking home in hopes that they'll drive away. Of course, it didn't work out that way. They speed up and the man gets outside of the van and starts running towards me. I instantly take off, but running in deep snow boots is quite hard. So what do? I take off both of my boots, carry them, and continue sprinting for my life. I turn, and instead of going home, I'm just twisting and turning through the streets. While this guy is kind of staggering, I assume he was some sort of drug addict or alcoholic, and the taxi is speeding much faster. I can't think of what to do except run through the graveyard nearby, run to the forest behind it, and there I run along the paved trail in the forest until I get home, which took me longer, but I lost them. I rush inside, lock the doors and the windows. I sit in my living room all night with a knife in my hand. Why I didn't call the police, I don't know. I was still stoned, and so not really thinking clearly. Also, my mom wasn't in town, so I was home alone. I eventually fell asleep for a while, and when I woke up in the morning, I called the police and told them everything that happened. They didn't find anything but said they'd get back to me if they did. For anonymous's sake, I'm going to call my friend Blanche. We met during my sophomore year of university. When we ended up taking the same French courses, we hit it off really well, and we ended up going to our campus's French club events. We became best friends. But the thing was, the closer we got, the less I came to be like Blanche. I know it sounds weird, but she would tell me secrets, like how the thought of yellow cake turns her on, and what she would once said cake when she encountered it. I'll spare you the unpleasant details. She expressed these feelings with Asian cuisine as well, so things were really weird. Once we agreed to work on a group project, only for her to literally do nothing, she seemed oblivious as to why I was angry. But I digress. She began copying me in various ways, gestures, tone of voice, siding with my opinion on various topics when she didn't do so before. I ended up switching my major because I guess the upper level classes for my degree weren't in demand like the intro courses. I found out I could study abroad with this degree and applied for a scholarship, but the trip fell through due to low interest. Fortunately, I was allowed to use the money on another student abroad trip of my choice. Blanche suggested to me that I go on the same trip as her and one of our mutual peers. I figured I may as well, since we were still good on terms at this point. One thing you must remember, Blanche went on the study abroad trip before. This is important to know later. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Blanche insisted we drive to the location with the mutual peer I referenced earlier. I asked her what she had packed on her last trip, and she would lie about various aspects. For instance, I asked if we needed to pack cookware, and she insisted we did not need to, but then would say she regretted not doing so last time. It was just a weird thing to lie about. The day we depart arrives, and it's the day before Mother's Day. I had not studied abroad before, so I gave my mom a hug and let her know how to contact me in case of an emergency. As I gave my mom a hug, I see Blanche glaring at my mother. I tell myself I imagined it and just pack my stuff into her older-than-dirt car. As we drive to pick up the mutual classmate, she tells me my mother threatened her when I was away. Now I know this is a lie, not just because my mother isn't a violent person, but I was with Blanche the whole time I was packing. If my mother made a threat, I would have heard it. I told her that she was a liar, and she just blew off my comment. So we pick up the mutual classmate, and he has a hard time hearing us up in the front seat. We try to keep him in the conversation, and he mentions he can't live without technology. I tease him and ask him, so what would happen if we just dumped you in the woods right here, where there's no Wi-Fi or signal? And he laughed and explained he'd be helpless. Blanche takes it one step further. Blanche asked how funny it would be if we just dumped him and we put him in the sex trade and traumatized him for life. Dead silence from us both, but she seemed oblivious. It was an awkward ride. We got to the hotel and I wake up hours before my classmates the next morning. As I mentioned earlier, it was Mother's Day, so I give my mom a call so she knows we made it all right. Halfway through the call, Blanche sends me a text demanding to know where I went. I hear her feet angrily pound against the ground as she approached, so I told my mom I'd call her back later and hang up. Time skipped to when we get to the campus. She immediately ditches me and the classmate to do her own thing, while we aimlessly try to figure out where to go. We had a meeting before to our apartments, but since the classmate and I weren't familiar with the campus, we could not find the building. Minutes before the meeting, Blanche texts me and asked me where we went, and the two of us skated into the meeting with minutes to spare. We caught up with Blanche, and she asked where we went. I explained my phone plan. I was only afforded up to so many texts and couldn't reply. I asked why she ditched us and didn't tell us where we were going. She then lies and says she had neither of our phone numbers, even though she had texted me 10 times prior. At this meeting, we had to pick up 3 classes of our choice for the program that aligned with our interest. I was tired of Blanche at this point, so when I saw her copying my answers, I would change them. When I saw her erase and copy my choices again, I reselected my classes and flipped the paper over. I just needed space from her. The 3 of us go shopping, and Blanche insists we pool our money so we have more spending power. It seemed logical, and since I discovered she lied about having cookware supplied for us, I wanted to buy pots and pans. She tells me there's no need. One of our roommates would loan us hers and suggest we spend 1/3 of our funds on wine. We bought a few frozen meals and pasta and returned to the apartment. I cooked dinner, and we have a ton of leftovers, which I pack up since no one said they wanted any. Blanche asks if she can have some of the leftovers, and I tell her if we still have some on Friday, they're all yours. Not only were my leftovers gone before Friday, but so was all my food that I purchased for myself. I had no more money to go shopping. Blanche then tells my roommates one evening that I had a variety of weapons and was liberal with how I used them. I was horrified and embarrassed. Not only was this a lie, but she seemed to think my displeasure was amusing. She then goes on to tell my roommates she studies psychology, and my mother would frequently consult her for advice on her cases. She then casually suggests that we cook meth in the kitchen. I was horrified, and so were my roommates. I try to laugh it off like a joke, but Blanche is dead serious. I scold her and say that I'm not interested. My mind was made up at this point. We needed a new apartment. At first, the university thinks my request is foolish, to say the least, but when I mention meth, they immediately agree to find a new apartment. So I go back to my apartment to start packing. Blanche got the notice. She was reported for potential drug use, and she's told I'm leaving the apartment. She pushes me into my room and blames one of our roommates for reporting her, and says that this report is why I'm being kicked out of the apartment. I try to convince her our roommate is innocent, but Blanche wasn't about to hear it. So she convinces both of our roommates to go to the main office and demand answers. I keep packing and wash a few loads of dirty clothes. As I climb the stairs back up to the apartment, I run into Blanche and the roommates who are consoling her. The main office told her I reported her. I really wish they had not, because they triggered a monster. Blanche starts violently staring me down, like she's ready to fight. I play it cool when this happens. I realize she owes me the money because she won't be giving me a ride home. I take the money and switch apartments. I thought this was the end, but I was way off the mark. This wasn't even the trip. This wasn't even the tip of the iceberg. Each week, the university had mandatory meetings in which they would take us on field trips of sorts for cultural immersion. Blanche would always sit in the meetings where I could see her and would stare at me for the duration of these meetings, with my roommates babying her like she was a scorned saint. At the end of each meeting, everyone had to sign up for a trip that we discussed at the meeting. Blanche would stand immediately behind me in lines and sign up for the same trips I would. This is not a crime in and of itself, but one of the trips, she would either stand immediately behind me or in my line of vision, glaring at me through her sunglasses. On one trip, I discovered the town had public Wi-Fi, so as long as you were in town limits, you could access the internet for free. So I caught up with a couple of friends during lunch. A mutual friend of ours let me know Blanche had been sending everyone in our social circles messages about how I tried to physically attack her, and he sent me the screenshots of what she had sent him. Just then, I get a text from the witch herself, Blanche. I look up from my phone and see she is standing immediately behind me with a roommate. Instead of talking to me verbally, she gestures towards her phone, indicating I should text back. I just tell her this: look, I can't text because, like I told you, I have a limited number of texts I can send. I am not going to waste them. Furthermore, I don't feel comfortable talking to you, especially not here. If you want to talk, we can do it at the university. I think we are on the same page, but not 5 minutes later, the mutual friend who sent me the screenshots updates me. Blanche immediately texts him saying I violently yelled at her and threatened her. I figured it's best to just never be in the same place as her to avoid these accusations. So that's what I do. At the weekly meetings, I wait for her to sign up for something so I can pick up something else. I ignored her, but one day she followed me into the ladies' room and tried to grab me by my arm to talk. I narrowly avoid her grasp, but she tried to follow me to class. I told the university about this and they let my home university in on everything. I just wanted to let them know she was just following me around and trying to get me to engage with her. My host university ended up barring her from future trips because of the drug accusations. I'd like to say this was the end of it, but she tried to get me fired for reporting to work. That's a story in and of itself, so I won't share it here. A week ago, my mom called me and told me to check my LinkedIn account. It was a weird request, but she told me Blanche was spying on her LinkedIn account. Sure enough, Blanche was lurking on my account. We both blocked her, so I hope that's the end of it. Blanche, let's never meet again. So this happened when I was 18 years old. I didn't have much dating experience. Hell, I didn't know shit about dating. I grew up in a very strict family. We weren't religious or anything. It's just my mom was a cunt and my father was a complete asshole. They literally ground me for getting a B on an assignment at school. They were the rich yuppie type. They didn't care about nothing but money, and they'd always tell me that I was stupid and that I'd never amount to anything because I'm retarded and I get bad grades. So one day I'm on Facebook, I'm checking my messages and playing those stupid games that you get on Facebook, and then out of nowhere I get this friend request from this super cute guy. I accept, and he immediately starts messaging me. He asks how I'm doing. Everything seems innocent and all. He then tells me I'm pretty and I'm loving the attention, and I'm thinking that he is being genuine and that he actually likes me. We chat for a few hours, and he's a smooth talking motherfucker to say the least. He then asks why I don't have more pictures, or that many pictures. I tell him I don't know, and he tells me that I'm sexy, that he wants to see me in my bikini. I'm nervous as fuck, but I don't want to lose this guy. He's super cute and sweet, or so he seems. So I send him some bikini pics, and then he asks if I want to do a video chat, and I agree. He starts innocent, telling me he wants to take me out to dinner and a movie, and tells me that he's romantic, and he seems so sweet. He then asks me to show him my titties. I'm nervous, and I'm shy about doing so. He somehow knows just the right words to make me let my guard down, and I end up giving him a full live show. Weeks go by, and I never hear from him again. I write him on Facebook, and he ignores my messages. Several weeks go by, and he asks me for more pictures. I tell him no, and that I want to talk about our relationship. He calls me a tease and a whore, and then he blocks me. My parents are divorced, and because of this, I visit my dad, stepmom, and younger brother every other weekend. I do not enjoy going to my dad's house, not because I don't enjoy his company or anything of the sort, but because of an incident that occurred nearly 2 years ago. My dad doesn't live in the ghetto like most other stories claim. He lives in a trailer park, truly living up to the standard of Oklahoma living. It's not uncommon for people addicted to meth to live in these places for a couple of weeks before they are evicted or arrested. It was my weekend to go to my dad's house. I got there and we visited and ate dinner and such as families do. My dad and stepmom had already put my baby brother to bed, and they had went to sleep themselves. After about 30 or so minutes, I also fell asleep on the couch in the living room. They are not in the financial situation to set up a room for me on my own. I wake up to the sound of loud banging on the paper-thin door of the trailer house. I didn't freak out at this point due to the groggy stupor just waking up had put upon me, as if it were the middle of the Sunday afternoon and I had gotten a polite knock on the door from a neighbor to ask to borrow sugar for their cake. I started to answer the door. I fumbled with the lock, but luckily I didn't have the function to even close the unblocking of the 3 locks they had. I finally fully woke up and realized what the hell it was I was doing. I started to panic because I heard the voice of a man who sounded like a stereotypical redneck say, "I know you were in there. Now let me in." I suppose he knew I was inside because he heard me messing with the locks. I didn't dare say anything back to the deranged man on the other side of the weak door that had surprisingly not gave in from his relentless pounding on it. After he said this, he started to kick the door. I didn't piece that together at the time because all I heard was loud thuds slamming against the door. But later, I found out that he had used the guardrail on the porch as leverage to position himself between the railing and our front door, kicking it. My reasoning for knowing that is because the next day, the flimsy railing was bowed outward right in front of the door, where he had leaned back on it. His screams and attempts to bust through the door somehow did not manage to wake up either my dad or stepmom, so I bolted to their room and burst in and almost hesitated to wake them up in fear I would somehow get in trouble for this. The man's screams grow louder and louder, and he said something about how he deeply missed me. This still tends to freak me out, thinking about what he said. How could the man miss me if he didn't know me? I knew that I sure as hell didn't know him by the sound of his voice. I woke up my parents. They jumped out of bed after seeing the horror on my face and hearing the wails of the man outside. They both ran to the front door and yelled from the other side of the cardboard cutout that kept this creeper from doing God knows what, and yelling, "Get away, we are calling the police." The man yelled back, but in pain, as if it sounded like he had fallen down our stairs. He did. After we heard the agony-filled screech, we heard a screech of a different kind as he peeled out of our driveway, and what sounded like a truck of some sort. My dad opened the door to see if he could catch his license plate. Of course, he couldn't, as the creepy-ass guy had already hightailed it out of there, and it was the middle of the night. As most criminals of his caliber were, this man was clearly a coward. He had fled at only the sound of another adult's voice. I'm not complaining, though. I was glad this guy was gone. Clearly, he was out of his mind or dealing with some sort of substance abuse, if not both. Nothing like this has ever happened at their house again. That doesn't mean that it's not unnerving to be there and try to sleep in their living room, because believe me, it is. The experience wouldn't have been quite as scary if it weren't for him saying that he missed me. That always stayed with me. I'm not sure what he meant by that or what his motive was for trying to break in, but I think I'm better off not knowing. It scares me to think that he could show back up there at any time, not just because he could hurt me while I visit, but he could also hurt my baby brother, who is only a couple of years old. It also scares me to think that if it wasn't for all of the locks put on the door by my dad being too cautious, I could have let the psycho into the house. As I said before, he hasn't came back, and I hope he doesn't. So, creepy guy who tried to break into my dad's house because you missed me, let's not meet again. Okay, here we go. I moved in a new apartment last April. This was my first time having a place all to myself, so I was stoked. As soon as I move in, I notice the place smells like cigarettes. Maybe it's from the previous resident, so I buy some plug-ins and assume it will dissipate. A week later, I'm still dealing with the smell. I'm a relatively petite 20-something woman, so I don't make a habit of knocking on random doors. Anyway, this guy answers. I ask if he's smoking cigarettes inside and explain why I need it to stop. He's super forward with me, immediately kissing my hand, and asks if I'm single. I tell him I am seeing someone, and he says to let him know if it doesn't work out. All's fine for a week. Then the smell creeps in again. I start getting very pissed off and text the neighbor. He's all apologetic. Says his friend was at his apartment while he was at work and forgot to tell him the rules. Who are these people with zero home training? Turns out the neighbor had been homeless for a time and lets his still homeless friend crash with him. I'm initially sympathetic, but only to the extent because they are fucking with my health. I also work from home, so there's basically no escape from the toxic smoke. Fast forward a few months and I haven't had to deal with anything. Hadn't even seen the neighbor for a while. Assumed he moved, and I was happy about it. Then he suddenly pops back up, knocks on my door to tell me this stupid story about how he got arrested while on the local college campus because he looked like this guy who was stalking a female student and had to sit in jail for 3 months. Now, I'm not stupid, so I took all that with a grain of salt. Also, years prior to this, the guy had apparently been in a car accident, suffered a traumatic brain injury, and is autistic because of it. This kinda explains why he seems to not understand normal boundaries or pick up on nonverbal communication. Now he's making a habit of knocking on my door at random times to ask me to drive him places, or if my boyfriend and I want to go ice skating with him. This drives me insane, because I work from home and I just hate unannounced visitors. But this guy lives directly behind me, knows what car I drive, my boyfriend drives, and is familiar with my dog, so I hesitate telling him to leave me alone. February, he gets arrested again on campus on Valentine's Day. While he's in jail for 3 months, his homeless friends realize his apartment is empty and unlocked, so they have a free place to stay, a free place to chain smoke, and make my life miserable. I call management multiple times and they completely brush me off. I'm sick, unable to work enough, pretty much irrationally angry at this point, so I start knocking and telling these people they have to stop. At one point I go over there, talk to a woman I don't recognize at all, and notice a massive tent in the living room. There's basically a homeless camp in the apartment next to me. After going over there twice in a day, because the smoke was so bad, I lose it at these people, my boyfriend with me, so I hold nothing back, screaming, crying, stomping around, telling them they have got to stop fucking with my life like this. Thankfully, my boyfriend knew the 2 people that were there while I was on my triad. We look up their criminal records, not pretty. B&Es, petty theft, possession of methamphetamine, great. Now I realize why they insist on smoking cigarettes inside. Probably to cover the smell of something far sinister. Yeah, you wouldn't know that unless you actually smoke crystal meth yourself. No surprise, I'm going insane. Fast forward to May. He's out of jail again and back apologizing to me. Leaves me a stupid note and a fake plant to say he's sorry. I stop answering the door if my boyfriend is not home because I don't want to deal with his stupid ass anymore. Finally, at the end of May, he moves out. Management puts up a notice on the door saying no trespassing. Police will be called immediately if anyone is seen entering or exiting this unit. My nightmare is finally over. So I was at the mall with my mother, and we were having a great time. I don't get to see my mother all that often. We went shopping for makeup, tried on a few dresses and some shoes. I finally decided on the dress I wanted to buy. My mother had gone to the restroom for a few minutes, so I had to wait for her to come back so that I could tell her about the dress that I wanted, since she would be the one paying for it. As I was waiting for my mother, this creepy old guy comes up to me and starts talking to me. I didn't mind at first. Then he started to say inappropriate things to me. He started talking about a bunch of perverted things he would like to do to me. I screamed for security, and the guards came over to where I was at. The man took off running. The guards asked me if I was okay, and I gave them a description of the creepy old fucker. They sent the information to the police. A few days later, on the news, that same old guy was arrested for hundreds of illegal videos on his computer, multiple accounts of sexual battery, molestation, and possibly murder. I am so glad that the guards at the mall responded so fast to my cries for help. I hate to think that I could have been his next victim. I feel terrible for all of the lives that he has destroyed. Creepy old bastard from the mall, I hope you fucking rot in hell, you scumbag pervert. So this happened when I was 9 years old during the summer. I grew up living with my parents and younger sisters, and our house was situated on a cul-de-sac. At the end of our cul-de-sac, there were a row of hedges with an opening at either end that led out to a huge field that had a tennis court, a playground, and a long pathway. This is relevant for later. Everybody that lived on our cul-de-sac knew each other pretty well. There were also a few kids my age, so I spent most of my free time playing outside on the grass with them. It's also worth noting that it was absolutely forbidden for any of us to venture out beyond the hedges without an adult, because our parents would not be able to see us from their houses. So one late afternoon, there were 5 of us sat on the grass chatting. It was pretty rare for someone that didn't live on the cul-de-sac to pass through, so it caught my eye when I saw a man making his way hurriedly along the pathway closest to my house. He had a scowl on his face and stared directly at us the entire time he was walking past. There was just complete silence between us until we walked through the hedge opening, and I could tell by the other kids' faces they too felt uneasy about him. We then immediately asked each other if anybody knew or had seen him before. None of us had. It was quickly forgotten about, and soon enough, each of our mothers had called us in for dinner. Around 10 minutes after we had finished dinner, I was in the kitchen helping my mom with the dishes. Our kitchen had a large window that faced out onto the grass outside, so I was taken aback when the same guy walked past again, in the same hurried manner, with the same scowl, this time staring directly into our kitchen. He had walked past. I gasped and told my mom that weird man was staring at us earlier. She looked up at him walking past, but didn't see anything until he immediately walked past in the opposite direction, again staring at us as he walked past. I yelled, "Mom!" and pointed straight at him. She saw him and ushered me out of the kitchen, saying something along the lines of, "Don't be silly. He's probably looking for someone." I went upstairs to get washed and ready for bed, the entire time feeling a bit freaked out by him. From then onward, I started spotting him at least weekly standing outside our local places, such as the post office, our local convenience store, etc. Each time I saw him, he was alone and not really ever doing much, just standing and looking around. I was always in my mom's car when I saw him, so I just ducked and kept out of his vision whenever I saw him. There were no more direct encounters, so I figured he was probably new to the area, and over time my nervousness of him lessened. Fast forward to winter. I was at school and playing on the playground during our lunch break. Towards the top end of the playground was a padlocked gate that was about 8 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. It was rarely ever used, so it caught my attention when my vision raced past the gate and I caught a shadow standing there. I did a double take, and it was the man. He was pressed right up against the gate, with both hands leveled, with his head gripping the bars, staring straight at me. I freaked the hell out and started screaming and hysterically crying, and made a run for it into the school building. One of the lunchtime supervisors, who also happened to live with her kids on our cul-de-sac, saw what had happened and took me straight into the nurse's office. The head teacher, along with a few other teachers, were called into the room and asked what had happened. I was too panicked to say anything outside of, "The man is out there." So the playground supervisor neighbor took over and explained to them. She said she had spotted him a few times on our cul-de-sac and had a bad feeling about him, and had told her kids not to talk to him. The teacher went to another room to look at the footage of the security camera placed on the side gate. After a while, they came back to the nurse's office and decided to call my parents and the police. The decision was made for my parents to pick me up from school early so the police can come to our house and take a statement, and because I was a hyperventilating wreck. On the car journey home, my mom told me that the teachers had said the camera footage showed him standing at the gate and then sprinting away, which they figured was because I started screaming and crying. She said it was a good thing because I scared him away, but I was bright for my age, and I knew she was saying that only to comfort me. We meet the two police officers at our house, one female officer, one male officer. They are very friendly and make me feel at ease. Whilst they are asking me all of the relevant questions, they then asked me to describe what he looked like. But being so young, I could only say that he was white, tall, with short brown hair. They pressed for more information, such as tattoos. The only thing that come to mind, that he looked like Dan Sullivan from EastEnders. This was met with instant laughter from both police officers and my parents, with the female officer commenting, "Wow, he must be quite good looking." As soon as she said this, my heart sank. After a while, the police had wrapped up the statement and told us to notify them to any more occurrences with this man. I was grateful for their help, but I could not help but feel like I wasn't being taken seriously by the adults. After this, I stopped seeing the guy around town, and the kids on our cul-de-sac say they don't see him either. Life goes on, and gradually, I regained the confidence to play outside again, both with friends and by myself. A year and a half later, I'm 11 years old, and it's the summertime. My parents had gone away on holiday, so my grandma and my aunt were staying at our house, looking after me and my younger sisters for the week. They were a lot more lenient than my parents and would let us play out for longer. And they even let me play over at the tennis court beyond the hedges. It was around 6 p.m. and was still light out, and I was racing my bike up and down the long path situated in the middle of the large field. I had completely worn myself out, and I was on the part of the path where it forks off near the tennis court, so I just sat on my bike for a while trying to catch my breath, while watching a group of people further down on the field playing cricket. Next thing I know, I hear somebody quietly but loud enough for me to hear it say, "Hey." I looked around, and I could not see anybody close enough that I would have been able to hear. I then hear a whistle, which leads my eyes directly over to an alleyway sandwiched between the hedgerow and the tennis court, and I recognize it to be the man from when I was younger. The sheer shock of seeing him again completely froze me up. I could not move. He steps out of the alleyway with one hand over his crotch area. He then uses the same hand to gesture me to come over, and it's then that I see the top button of his pants and his fly undone. I accept the very worst is most probably about to happen, and I instantly go into panic mode. I know that I need to get to safety ASAP, and I figured out my options. The first option is to head straight down the field to the group of people playing cricket, but I don't know these people, and I don't know if I can rely on them to keep me safe from this man. My second option is to ride my bike as fast as I can down the path past the tennis court, around the corner, and into my cul-de-sac. However, the man is in the alleyway, and if he ran through it, he would easily beat me to the hedge opening to block my way, or catch me if he wanted. I started pedaling like a madman and decided to head to my cul-de-sac. As I turn the corner, I see that he isn't at the end of the alleyway yet, so I bomb it through the hedge opening. I hear him running and saying, "Just come here." So I race down the pathway and make it to my house. The entire time I'm shouting for my grandma and aunt, and the kids playing out on the grass figuring something is up and ask what is wrong. I ditch my bike outside my house, go inside and lock the door, and I find my aunt in the kitchen. She's panicked and asks me what's wrong. So I explain everything as fast as I could and say we need to call the police. The next thing I know, I hear the kids outside yelling and screaming "go away" and calling for their parents. We look outside the kitchen window, and the man is walking past our house looking at me dead in my eyes, completely undeterred by the commotion outside and my aunt standing next to me. He walks out of our line of vision, out of the cul-de-sac and down the road. My aunt tells me to quickly come with her in her car to follow him, so she can at least see if she can follow him to where he lives. I get in the car and sit in the passenger footwell, out of sight. After about 4 minutes of driving, she brakes and asks, "Is that him?" I poke my head up. We are literally outside of one of my best friend's houses. He's standing at an old beaten up telephone booth that hasn't worked all the time I've known it to be there. He's holding the phone to his ear, but it isn't saying or doing anything. To his right are 3 girls, a little older than I am, sat on a bench chatting away. Oblivious to the man stood silently at a public telephone that doesn't work. My aunt parks her car and says she's going to sit and watch and make sure the girls are okay, and tells me to stay down. After no longer than a minute, my aunt says these girls are getting up, so I poke my head up again, and I see them go on their way. Suddenly the man literally just drops the phone and turns around on the spot to face the girls. Before he can even take a step out of the telephone booth, my aunt starts honking her horn and opening her door to yell at him to go away and leave the girls alone. I see him completely freak out and make a break for it up an alleyway, with which has 2 exits. The girls turn around and try to figure out what's going on, but my aunt pulls away and was headed over to one of the alleyway exits. My aunt tells me to get her phone from her bag to call the police. We get to exit number 1, but he is nowhere to be seen, so we head to exit number 2. Meanwhile, the policewoman on the phone says she is sending for a patrol car to the area and another to our house, so we can give a statement. We get to exit number 2, and again we can't find him anywhere. We decide to head home to meet the police, where I give another statement. The police officers sent this time around take me much more seriously, and after the statement was given, they said they will also spend some time driving around the immediate area looking for the guy. From then on, I did not see the man at all, and nor did my friend. We did not ever receive any type of update from the police, so I never knew what came of the investigation. The situation ended up with me being super protective and paranoid over my younger sisters whenever they were playing outside unsupervised. And I worried that if they were caught up in the same situation, they might not have been as lucky as I am. So scary, weird guy, let's not ever meet again. I lived in a rural area. Nothing but cow pastures and farms for miles. The nearest city was about 3 miles from where I lived. Living in this area, you either worked on a farm or you traveled the 3 miles into the city for work. I was a stay-at-home mother at the time, and nobody had ever bothered me or my family. My husband thought that we would be safe while he went to work at a small computer repair shop in the city. Oh, how I wish he would have been right. My son was only 3 years old at the time, and since we lived in a relatively secluded area, I thought that he would be safe while he played with the baby goats that we kept in the backyard. I should have known something was wrong when he came running through the back door one day screaming and crying about one of the baby goats being gone. He was very easy to calm down whenever he got worked up, but for some reason, today was not one of his good days. My husband was going to be working late tonight, and wouldn't be home for several hours. Even though we lived in a secluded area, the phone calls from scammers and telemarketers were very frequent. Today was one of the days where the phone just rang non-stop. I was already frustrated with not being able to calm my son down, and the phone ringing wasn't making it any better. After the 3rd or 4th call, I answered every call with an obvious tone of disdain. The tone of my voice seemed to end the rapid string of phone calls. All of a sudden, I hear the goats going absolutely crazy outside, so I had to go investigate. My son stayed in the living room, watching his cartoons and eating his favorite snack, Pop-Tarts and chocolate milk. I was sure that he would be safe while I was out back investigating whatever caused the goats to lose their minds. When I went outside, I saw a man standing in our pasture, just staring directly at my house. Of course, being the only one that was home with my son, I was immediately terrified. I ran back into the house and the man began to pursue me. When I got inside, I was able to lock the door before he could get in and call the police. It seemed like an eternity before the cops showed up to take the man away. Disturbing man that was terrorizing my animals. Let's never, ever meet again.